All right, so now I'd like to hand over the floor to Mr. Bob Kelley.
Thanks very much, China. I appreciate it. Thanks to China and the GFA for setting this up. I really do appreciate this. You know, in kind of an interesting little way, the world has changed. Almost 2 years ago to the day, I did a similar presentation for the Volleyball Federation that nobody showed up to because it was the day before the world shut down. And so that was kind of an interesting thing. So hopefully we have a few more people in the audience today, so that's nice. As China mentioned, I'm the assistant head of school at St. John's, and I've been that for the past 6 years. Before I was the head of school, assistant head of school there, I was the director of college guidance for about 15 years. So I learned a little bit about how to get into college that way. When they kicked me upstairs and got me out of the way, we hired somebody new to come in and take over, and that is Jane Shiu, who's with us today. She is currently the college counselor at St. John's, and so her primary responsibility is getting our students into colleges, and she's done a fantastic job over the years, and so we're very, very happy to have her. And I'm grateful that she decided to come with us today to talk about things that I'll forget because it's been so long since I've done these presentations. But so anyway, so that's Jane. And so thank you very much for this, GFA and everybody. I was, so yeah, I mean, essentially what we're going to look at is today, we're going to look at an overview of college admissions, what happens, how you get into college, what the colleges people are looking for, all that different type of stuff. We're going to go over some definitions, sports leagues, divisions, and things like that. We're going to talk about academic requirements, testings, scholarships, and financial aid in general, and then getting noticed. And so that's kind of where we're going. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and then we can address those questions as we can. All right. So let's get started, and let's talk about what it means to get to college. Okay. So there are in the United States, there are about 4,000 colleges and universities, and about 1,700 of them are soccer programs. So one of the mistakes that people make in college admissions is that they're a little bit too defensive about, I need to see that, I need to find a place that will accept me. There's 4,000 colleges, somebody's going to accept you, so that's not a problem. And the problem that you really want to think about is where you want to go. The whole process of college and getting admitted into college is one of the things I like to say is to make yourself cooler than all the other applicants. And you guys have a big advantage in that because you guys are on Guam. And so I want you to visualize for a minute a college admissions representative sitting at a desk with a stack of files about this high, and they're going through it, and they pick up a file. Where's the kid from? New York. Where's the kid from? New Jersey. Where's the kid from? New York. Where's the kid from? Los Angeles. Where's the kid from? Guam. Whoa, wait a minute. That's going to grab some attention just a little bit. Again, going to say, let me take another look at this because it's going to be kind of an interesting element in their big old stack of envelopes looking through. So that's one of the things that you really want to talk about and try to figure that out. But we'll get back to that in a minute again. Testing, and we'll talk about testing testing a little bit because testing's changed a little bit in the past couple of years. And normally we start telling kids to take tests in their junior year, and that would be SATs and ACTs. And then the applications would be done in the fall of the senior year. And then sometimes a little bit earlier for athletes. And again, we'll get to some of that in a minute. So timeline-wise, what you're looking at is really starting in earnest in your junior year. One of the things that you can take is the PSAT. And I know that in the public schools here and some of the private schools, it's not quite the same robust testing program. So it can create some confusion on that. But if you can take the PSAT, talk to the counselor at your school, see if you can take it in your junior year anyway. And that will kind of give you a little diagnostic as to how you're doing relative to the SAT, okay? Jane, you want to talk a little about the application timeline here?
Sure. Good afternoon. Good to see everybody. So the application timeline for someone who's looking to play sports in college has a lot of similarities to a student who's just simply looking to go to college, period, right? And the foundation is quite simply strong academics. It does not matter if you are like the #1 player in the world if your academics are not strong. So starting freshman year, students really need to be sure they are not only working really hard on the practice field, but also really pushing themselves in the classroom as well. So take challenging courses, make sure you're sitting with your counselor, make sure you're taking courses that will meet the NCAA and university requirements, right? So you're not just taking, one English class freshman year and like not doing any more English for the rest of your high school career. Make sure you're meeting those requirements. And most schools on Guam, the graduation requirements are also the requirements that the NCAA and so forth require as well, but make sure you're just checking with your coaches, checking with your teachers to ensure that the courses you're taking are meeting those prerequisites. So push yourself in your classes, challenge yourself, and then also start recording and building your athletic resume. Your coaches will certainly share more about this information, but essentially you're just jotting down your accomplishments in your sports, right? You went to this tournament, you are playing this role, you were involved in these different activities within soccer, right? So record all of that information because that will certainly come in handy when you are a junior and senior and you're reaching out to coaches, you are applying to schools. So start recording that information now. Sophomore year, again, academics, like that is your #1 thing. Keep pushing yourself academically, keep ensuring that your grades are as high as possible, and ensure that you're working with your counselor to make sure that you're taking the courses you need and passing them, of course, and not just passing them with like a D, like push for A's and B's. The higher your grades are, the more opportunities you will have, the more doors that will open. Every year there are students who athletically definitely meet the qualifications for certain schools. Like coaches are really interested in these student athletes, but their grades just don't meet the bar. And so they're not able to be recruited at these particular schools because their grades aren't high enough. So ensure that's not the case for you. Ensure your grades are as high as possible. Continue to update that athletic resume. And then start looking at schools. Start looking at schools that you might be interested in, both in terms of playing at, but also have the different academic programs you might be interested in as well.
You know, if I may just underscore, time and time again, the higher your grades are, the more opportunities you will have. So really, that's one of the things that you really want to make sure you're following your grad requirements, you're doing the best you can, because if you have a 4.0, you're going to have more options than the kid with a 2.3. Okay, just understand that. All right.
Again, junior year academics, #1 thing. And then we'll start talking about testing. We have another slide for testing, but as a junior, this is when you're taking your SAT and ACT. Don't worry about doing it freshman and sophomore year. Focus then for junior year for your testing, and then continue to build and update the athletic resume. You may also have opportunities to travel off island and perhaps over the summer do different sport camps. If that's an option, right? If that works for your family, for your family finances and plans and travel and so forth, perhaps go to some of the colleges that you're interested in and attend their sport camps. Because that will help you not only get to know the school and decide if that's a school you want to apply to, but also you're getting to know the coaching staff as well. And then senior year, I should have put academics, but like that should be a no-brainer at this point, right? Like you should continue continue pushing your grades and making sure your grades are as high as possible. And this is when applications are starting as well. There are 2 main deadlines. There are early applications and there's regular application deadlines. I made a quick little note with early decision because some schools use early decision to secure the athletes. Early application, early action, early decision are both November 1st deadlines. And with early decision, you are fully committing to that school. At St. John's, we've had some students who have gone on to play sports at the collegiate level, and a few of them have committed to their schools via early decision. So they are applying November 1st to a particular school. A good handful of schools use early decision because that allows them to secure their athletes. So that might be the case for you. But for regular application, that deadline is around January 1st.
Yeah, that's gonna vary widely from one university to the other. But January 1st is a good hard date to look at. If you use that as your application deadline, you'll be all right for a number of them. All right. So that's something. All right. Any questions on the timeline? Any questions on the timeline at all?
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Dwayne Paul. How is everybody? I'm just curious about the January 1st deadline. I just didn't really get that. So if we're thinking of, let's say, fall 2023,
Then January 1st, 2023 would be, roughly speaking, when that application is due.
if we're looking at 5 or 6 schools, we want to submit by January of 2020 and graduate from high school yet?
That's correct. Yes,
Wow.
you're going to get these things well in advance. So you're going to, so in fact, you're going to get your decisions from the schools at the latest April 1st. So again, let's just assume we're talking about the class of 2023.
Right.
So you're going to be applying in the fall of 2022 and or January of 2023. And then you're going to get an admissions decision somewhere before April 1st of 2023.
Right.
You're then going to graduate, send the final transcript to the universities in June of 2023,
Right.
and then enter the school in August or September.
Wow.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No problem. And then there's another important point that a lot of people misunderstand about that. When your final transcript gets sent to the university in June of your senior year, then they're going to reevaluate that transcript just to make sure you have not changed dramatically. And admissions decisions can change based on that final transcript. So make sure you stay strong the entire time. Okay. And yeah, so everybody, all right. All right. Let's see. All right. So Jane, again, you want to talk about the holistic review?
Sure. And just a quick heads up. The majority of selective schools in the United States, and this is both highly, highly selective to semi-selective schools, so schools with an acceptance rate of 60% or lower, are using what's called holistic review, that they're not just looking at a student's GPA. They're not just looking at a test score, but they're looking at many different components. Their grades, the courses that student chose to take in high school, their test scores. Again, we'll talk about test scores in a moment, their personal essay, supplemental essays as well, recommendation letters. And again, this depends on the school. Some schools require just one recommendation letter, some require multiple recommendation letters. And then also their activities and extracurriculars and leadership and so forth, which would include their soccer accomplishments. Not every single school in the United States uses a holistic review, but if a school is somewhat selective, so again, usually like a 60% acceptance rate or lower, they will, in most cases, be using holistic review and considering multiple factors, not just a student's grades.
You know, and you start looking at this list, and it seems like a lot of stuff, but some of it is kind of involved in the way that you've been performing. And one of the ones I want to call your attention to is the recommendation letters. And so you want to start thinking about what could a high school teacher honestly say about you when they're writing to you about a university. And so, you know, again, that's the kind of thing that you want to start thinking about as early as your freshman year. But as you go through, what have I been doing in class that this teacher could report accurately to universities out there? And one of the things that some kids kind of, we have, if the best thing your teacher can say about you is that you're quiet, that's not necessarily a great, so in this slide that Jane has, you're telling a story, you know, part of it is what you've shown to your teachers. And so your teachers are going to sit down there and say, all right, well, let me tell the story of this kid. And Susan is and then the teacher goes on from there. So, you know, participates in class, is prepared for class, has her homework done, has interesting, intriguing questions, follows along. When I ask students for questions in class, Susan's alert and available and ready to make those things. So again, you get back to the story that you're telling. That recommendation letter kind of comes in kind of important. What could a teacher honestly say about you in their class? And so that's one of the things that you want to start thinking about. The other point that Jane and I like to make all the time to our students is the last bullet point here. More is not necessarily better. As you guys know, a lot of things, particularly like the soccer, the national soccer teams, they're a lot of time commitment. It's a lot of time that it takes up. And so if you try to do 75 other activities and extracurriculars, you're going to, first of all, fall apart. But secondly, you're going to not be able to do a great job on any of them. And so then if you're asking one of your teachers for a recommendation letter, who is also the advisor to one of the clubs that you've not shown up with for 3 weeks because you're too busy doing your other activities, then that might show up again saying, you know, well, they're not great in my club, but. So those are things to think about. It's not necessarily a quantity, but it's a quality of engagement. On the application, they're going to ask you about your activities. What is it you do and what do you get out of it? What do you do? So you want to start thinking about that. And I would start thinking earlier is better than later. But again, a lot of people just think if I join 75 clubs, that's better than joining 3. And that's not necessarily the truth. It's the quality of engagement that's important, not necessarily the quantity of engagement. Okay. Anybody have any questions on this? Jane, are there more comments you wanted on this slide? All right, I'm assuming that's a no.
I actually do have 2 questions that were in the chat, if you would like to answer it now.
Sure.
The first one is from Miss Anita Tovis. What type of things go on athletic resumes?
So as Jane had mentioned before, basically it's just like a resume, although specifically athletic. So what have you done? So for example, let's say that you are a member of the under 20 men's national team and have been a member of the under 18 and the under 16 and the under 14. So then you'd say Guam under 14 national team from 2010 to 2012, traveled with the team to a tournament in Beijing. And so again, you're listing the things that you've done as an athlete specific to that sport. So just like you would with a regular resume, you know, I worked at St. John's for 30 years. I worked at Notre Dame for 1 year. I worked at Hillsborough Deering Middle School for 4 years. So that's okay. And then what's the next question?
The next question is, if we do not have a college counselor at our current high school, could it come from our guidance counselor? Yeah,
normally that's where you're mostly going to, the guidance counselor is going to be the one responsible for that. Okay. Any other questions? All right. So as you're probably aware, particularly if you're a basketball fan, there's this thing called the NCAA out there, the National Collegiate Athletic Association. Excuse me 1 second. And they divide themselves up into 3 separate divisions: Division 1, Division 2, Division 3. There is another league out there called the NAIA. And then lastly, there are a myriad of junior colleges in the United States, all of which would have various sports programs for you to do. Usually in the NCAA, it usually deals with the amount of money that they spend on their program. So the Division 1 would be all the big names of any school that you could look at. For those of us following along in the NCAA basketball tournament bracket, although my champion lost, you know, those are all the schools that are Division 1. Also, quick side note, it's possible that a school is Division 1 for football, but Division 2 for soccer. So just to keep that in mind too. But you're looking at in the world of soccer, a Division 1 school has 9.9 full scholarships that they can give to their school, to an athlete to come to their school. Division 2, again, smaller schools, they have 9 full scholarships. Division 3 does not offer athletic scholarships, okay? The NAIA is similar in skill level to Division 2, but they allow 12 scholarships. And then junior college is, there are varying things that cover all the junior colleges around. So a junior college, just so you know, is a 2-year university. And they're only going to offer what they call an associate's degree. And so you'd go there for 2 years, and then you would transfer into a 4-year university where you would end up getting a bachelor's degree. A lot of people like the junior college route because they are less expensive, and there are more junior colleges, and so it's easier to get a chance to play basketball, soccer, volleyball, whatever. One important note to consider about junior colleges: the vast majority of junior colleges do not have housing. So if you're going to go to a junior college to save money on tuition, you may end up spending a lot more on housing and food and electricity and water and all those other things to bear in mind. If you're going to a junior college that's right next door to your aunt's house and you like your aunt, hey, that's okay. But if you're going to a junior college that's in the middle of Wisconsin and you don't know anybody there, that could end up being a little bit costly too. So just some things to bear in mind. The other thing to remember about the Division I and the Division II schools, they don't have to give the full scholarships. More often than not, particularly for soccer, they're going to give partial scholarships. So they're going to take those 9.9 full scholarships and they're going to divide them up among 17 players. So very few to none are going to be a full scholarship for you to play soccer at that school. The same thing with Division II. It's the quantity of full scholarships, but that 9 full scholarships is the same as 18 half scholarships, or whatever other division they want to, division of that full scholarship they want to do. So bear that in mind too when you start looking at the amount of money that you're going to get from some of these schools. Okay? Any questions on that? All right. Okay. As Jane was mentioned earlier, that there are a minimum academic requirements to play in these leagues. So in the NCAA, the minimum GPA required to compete in Division I is a 2.3 GPA in approved core courses, which is important, and I'm going to come back to that in just a second, and earn an SAT score of 900 or ACT, some score of 75 to be eligible, with an asterisk. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to testing in a minute. But that 2.3 GPA is in approved core courses. So this is English and science and math, those history, those types of courses. If you've got not so great grades in those, but you've got 100 in PE, that's not really going to help you because they're going to take that 100 out and recalculate your GPA. So your GPA needs to be a minimum of a 2.3 in the core courses, not just overall, but in the core courses. Okay. And so keep in mind that if your core course GPA is higher, your SAT, it's a little bit of a matrix. So your SAT score can be a little bit lower. And this is what the NCAA calls the sliding scale. So, but just bear that in mind. Keep the 2.3 GPA in your mind. In the NAIA, an ACT of 18 or an SAT of 860, a GPA of 2.0, or top 50% of your class rank. Now, some schools on Guam, St. John's being one, we don't actually rank our students. So that one's not really an option, okay? You must maintain your GPA to continue your scholarship. We have had athletes, I'm not sure if they're soccer players or not, who have left Guam with a nice athletic scholarship, but they lost it because they were not able to maintain their GPA. And this, I don't want to rain down on everybody's parade, but only about 7.9% of high school athletes play soccer in college, and 1.1% play Division I. So I don't want you to throw up your hands and say it'll never happen, because it can. But I need to be honest in the things that I'm telling you. And so just understand that it's work, right? Okay. So those are the minimum academic requirements. Yes.
We'll share a resource with all of you at the end of the presentation, in which you can actually go and see what that sliding scale that Bob mentioned was, right? So like if you have this high of a GPA, you can therefore have a relatively lower SAT score or ACT score because your higher GPA is sort of compensating for it. And then the reverse is true as well. If you have a relatively lower GPA, if you earn a higher SAT or ACT score, that compensates for it as well. So we'll share that with you later so you can take actually a look and just get a sense for that as well.
So just so you're aware, back in the day when I was young, there were a couple of stories that came out in the media of great athletes who graduated from college and weren't able to read. And so that was kind of the thing that spurred all of this on. And the NCAA has created this thing called it used to be called the Clearinghouse. And so basically it's a website that you go and register. I think it costs $40. And it's a good idea to do it at the end of your junior year. And your high school will submit a transcript, and the NCAA will then view that transcript and determine if you are eligible. Technically, no college coach is supposed to talk to you until you have cleared that process. Although I'm not sure how carefully they enforce that one. I mean, if you can ask the college coach whatever you want to, and they can respond, but they're not supposed to initiate contact with anybody until you have cleared that NCAA Clearinghouse Eligibility Center. That's what it's called. Sorry, the Eligibility Center. And we have a URL for that later on in the presentation. Okay. Any other questions on that?
Yes, we have one question.
Okay.
So from Mr. Don Meaver, if the school doesn't rank the students, doesn't it hinder the college application process?
Usually not. The universities will ask the school why you don't rank students, and we have some pretty good reasons for not ranking our students. Number one is that we're already competitive enough as it is, and that would add just one other level of competitiveness to it. But yeah, no, it's not necessarily something that's going to. The universities are very used to schools not ranking their students. Yeah, so it's been around for a while. Any others? All right. Let's see. All right, as promised. Jane, you want to start talking about testing?
Sure. So testing right now in the middle of a pandemic has been really interesting. 3-4 years ago, many schools required either an SAT or an ACT score. But with the pandemic, students are just not able to safely sit for an exam, right? Testing centers closed, and it's just dangerous. And so the majority of schools in the United States became test optional, meaning if you had a test score, cool, you can go ahead and send it. If you didn't have a test score, that was totally fine. And colleges understood why you might not have a test score, right? Because you were not able to take a test. It was not safe. And so many schools in the United States adopted a test optional policy starting 2 years ago. And this year, many schools are continue to be test optional. The majority of schools are going to be test optional this upcoming year as well. Many of them are in a pilot program to evaluate whether or not a test score actually does play a role in their admission decisions and how the students do when they actually enroll and matriculate, at the school and so forth. So we're in this really interesting position of a lot of schools being test optional, but you still have that option of sitting for a test because things are now a lot safer and people are vaccinated and we know a lot more now as a result. There are some schools that are test blind. So even if you submit a test score, they're not going to look at it at all. So for example, the University of California school system is test blind. If you send a score, that doesn't matter. They won't look at it. So that's not even a factor at all. But because a good number of schools are test optional, we do recommend our students at St. John's to go ahead and study and sit for an SAT or an ACT. And then they can always choose whether or not to send that score in or not.
A couple of practical points. SAT test centers on the island. FD is one test center. St. John's is another SAT test center. And sometimes Guam High, but so that's confused. I'm not sure if they do that regularly or not. The only ACT test center on the island is St. John's, but important information here. All of the registration for these tests are done online. The school, we don't do any test registration at all. So my receptionist has a little script right next to her that, no, we don't do that here. You need to go visit the websites. The tests cost somewhere around $40-50 a piece to take. And again, the registration's all done online for that. The backstory to this is about the past 10 years, a lot of schools have been questioning whether the SAT or the ACT really helped in college admissions or not. And so when the pandemic came, it came in kind of about 4 years into an accelerating trend of schools not requiring the tests. And so I think that what ended up happening was that they really wanted, now they had a great opportunity to test their hypothesis. If they went for a couple of years with no test required, would they still get the same quality of applicant? And so they've been extending their test optional nature through the class of 2023 for the most part. Please make sure you check the schools individually. And that's really a quick side point that of the 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States are independent of one another. Nothing that one says has any bearing on what another one does. So always make sure that you check any information out with the specific schools that you're applying to. In fact, if anybody tells you anything such as, oh, every school in the United States does X, that they're probably not going to be talking, they don't know a whole lot about what they're talking about. Yeah, if you'll note, Jane and I always use words like many, some, a large number, those things, because there's no one universal statement that fits all universities in the United States. But test optional is a new thing out there. And so a lot fewer schools are requiring the test than used to. So, but that's something to bear in mind. And as Jane said, particularly if you're somebody looking for one of the more competitive schools, you should probably take a test and then decide whether or not you're going to send the score or not. I have AP and IB exams listed here for two reasons. One is that they do kind of play a role, particularly in the test optional world, they play a role. But then also we're going to be talking about financial aid in general in a minute, and AP and IB exams tend to be the best possible financial aid programs. Actually, there's only one school on the island that offers IB exams, so if you don't go to that school, don't worry about it. But AP exams cost about $92, and if you do well enough on your AP exams, then you can do two things. One is you can tell the admissions office about it, and number two, you can actually get credits given to you and or waived when you get to university. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Telling a school that I got a 4 on an AP exam in my sophomore year, again, if you go back to my earlier comment about making yourself cooler than everybody else, you know, that's kind of something to show them, to say, hey, you know, look, my grades are one thing, this, that, but this is a standardized exam that you know what it means, and I got a 4 on that test. So, and then if you got a 2 on the test, maybe you don't have to tell them about that. So that's the AP scale is 1 to 5, by the way, sorry. So that's one thing to bear in mind. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about credits and waivers in college. Generally, to graduate from college, you need about 126 credits. Again, generally, note, not an absolute statement. Generally, you need about 126 credits, which means you're going to be taking about 5 classes each semester that you're in college. If you can get some of those credits in advance via AP tests, that can help limit the amount of time you're in college, which could, of course, limit the amount of money that you have to pay should you not get an athletic scholarship. Now, the other way around is, which is interesting, is if you do get an athletic scholarship and you are playing, you can actually extend your time. You can still graduate early, but you can enroll in graduate school, and then the NCAA will allow, I think, a year of graduate school eligibility. So that's something that will help as well. All right. That's a lot of information about testing. Anything more, Jane? And then are there any questions about testing?
One thing I want to emphasize is that if you are choosing to sit for an SAT or an ACT, don't just go and quote unquote wing it. You're spending $50, $60 to sit for this exam, just like you wouldn't just go like wing it on the soccer field and just like, oh, I don't need to practice. Let me just go see how I'm going to do. Like, no, you need to practice, right? Like you would never go to a soccer tournament saying like, oh, let's just see how we do. Like you would be practicing for hours in the weeks and months prior to a big tournament. you need to think of it, the SAT and the ACT and your AP exams in the same way, right? You have to spend at least 2 months of just intensive study and review of multiple hours each week, just in preparation for the exam. So whatever result you get is an accurate reflection of where you are and the work you've put in. So be sure you're taking time to prepare, just like you would for soccer as well.
So the other thing along that line is that you don't have to spend a lot of money to prepare for the SAT either. The SATs or the ACT. Khan Academy online has an SAT prep class that you can go through. They'll give you some practice exams as well, so they'll give you some diagnostic stuff, and that's absolutely free. You can go to the store, bookstore, and get an SAT or ACT prep book. The one thing that I would encourage you to do is, if you're going to go down this road, I would set aside a specific time and day every week for this. Don't just say, oh yeah, I'll do that next week sometime. Say, okay, Sunday afternoon from 2:30 to 4 is my hour and a half that I'm going to devote to SAT prep. Otherwise you're never going to do it. So, but there are a myriad of resources that are free and available to everybody to prepare for the SAT. You don't have to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on tutors. Okay.
Hey, Bob, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go right ahead.
So, you know how you have said ACT, and then maybe your GPA is a little bit lower, or you can have GPA really quite strong, and then maybe SAT, ACT a little bit lower. It's kind of a balance of everything. Talk about like the Khan Academy, for example. There's all these resources, and you choose a day a week, and then over the next year you take that test. You should be pretty solid. Should we encourage our kids to focus on all the above and just try to make it as strong as possible? Or do we want a higher GPA? Do we want a higher SAT? I mean, is there I'm just curious.
I understand your question. And I'll tell you the answer that the admissions officer would give you when you visit college. You go visit the University of Colorado and you ask the admissions officer that question, their answer is going to be higher both. You want higher GPA and higher SAT scores. Over the history of the SAT's answer to the best possible preparation for the SAT or the ACT is to do well in your classes. And so if you are doing well in your classes and you're paying attention in Algebra 2 class and you're working hard, you're actually preparing for the SAT. So if you had to not do something, I would say don't focus a whole lot on the SAT over I would prioritize your classes over the SAT, but with a big caveat that Jane just mentioned. Don't go in blind. Go in, you got to have a practice test or two. You got to, again, you have to go in as with your eyes open as best you can, because I don't want you taking the test never having seen it before. But if you were going to force me to answer the question of what should I prioritize, I would say prioritize your classes. The most important part of your college application is always your transcript. And your transcript is going to tell the colleges what classes you took and what grades you got in those classes. So if you're doing things that detract from your ability to do well in the classes, then that's overall not necessarily going to help yourself.
Thank you. That's
no
awesome.
Problem. Okay. Any other questions?
Bob, I
Yeah.
have one question.
No problem, Coach Joe.
Yes. Can you elaborate on students taking multiple SAT tests and how that
Sure.
scores relate?
Sure, no problem. Basically, you'll find that most people are going to take the SAT. Who take the SAT, they take it probably on average 2.5 times. I know that I took it twice way back in the day, and I got the exact same score both times. And so you're going to find that when you get your SAT score report, the SAT, quick side point, the SAT is run by statisticians. They're not people who know English. They're not people who know math. They just know statistics, and they love those statistics. And so your SAT score report that you're going to get is going to say, based on your score, they'll actually tell you X percentage of kids who take it twice have improved their score, X percentage have dropped their score, and X percentage haven't changed. So that's going to depend, how many times you're going to take the test is going to depend on exactly what your score is. And so that's one of those elements. Really, if you take it more than 3 times, you're probably not really helping yourself. I don't know that you're hurting yourself other than the $60 you got to pay each time you take the test. Not to mention, you get to see my bright smiling face first thing every Saturday morning. Ooh, that's no fun. But it's, it really, after the 2nd or 3rd time, you're not going to find a big change in your score. As I alluded to with Dwayne's question, you might see a jump between your 1st and 2nd score because the first time, you didn't practice taking the test enough. And, I got to tell you, sitting on your butt and taking a test for 4.5 hours, that's a skill that a lot of people don't have. And so if you haven't done it very often, that can be uncomfortable your first time through. So sometimes the 2nd time through, you do have a tendency to raise your score a little bit. But really after the 3rd time, you're not going to see much of a change. But read the score report when you get it, because they'll actually give you that advice saying, based on this score, X percentage improved, X percentage don't. So that would be the best way to look at that. Okay.
Right. There's a concern of diminishing returns, right? And part of it has to do with student burnout, right? If you're taking the test 3, 4, 5 times, like there's a point, even if you're doing more studying, there's a point in which the student is burnt out, right? They're asking themselves, why am I doing this? I'm not getting better, or I'm not seeing the improvement that I want to see. So 2, 3 times max is what I normally recommend students. And also not starting testing until junior year. If students are testing sophomore year, you still have a whole year of learning, right? You still have your junior year in which you're learning even more content. So I would wait and maybe do the very first exam fall or winter of junior year.
So that's, again, that more to that point, Algebra 2 across the United States, Algebra 2 is an 11th grade course. And there are Algebra 2 questions on the test. So if you're taking the test as a sophomore and you haven't taken Algebra 2 yet, there's going to be some things that you just won't know. So, again, taking it before then, not necessarily helpful unless you happen to be a boy genius or girl genius. Then, that's a different story. But that's what I would tell you on that. All right. Any other questions? Coach Joe, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Thanks. And China, do you have a question?
Yes, we have one question for Ms. Ryan. So for the different tests, they'll take the higher score of however many times you take it.
So what you're asking is a question called super scoring. And again, I'm going to fall back on my earlier statement. Oftentimes, yes, there's no blanket statement for that every university will do this. Some will take some kind of, I'm not sure if they're doing this anymore, but there was one school about 5 years ago that tried to explain to me the way that they did some complicated taking the average of them all. Most schools want to look at your highest score for 2 reasons. One is that they want to make sure that they're giving you the best possible look. The other thing is, remember, they're going to turn around next year and say, our incoming freshman class had an SAT average of whatever. So a higher one makes them look better. So so some schools would take your best day. So they wouldn't necessarily mix and match their tests, but they take your best day. So October of 2022 was your best overall score, and that's the one that they would take. Other schools would take your best English score from this test and your best math score from that test. And then the ACT actually has about 5 different sections on it. And so that even gets a little bit more complicated as well as to what's going on there. Most schools are going to do a mix and match to get your best scores. Some will do some other weird combination. Okay. All right. Any more questions on this testing? The other thing I would tell you is that about 7 years ago, the SAT and the ACT were fairly different tests. They looked different in how they were presented, but over the years they have kind of come to look very, very similar. So if you were going to ask me what's the difference between the SAT and the ACT 7 years ago, I would have had a nice 1.5 hour diatribe for you. But now there's not a whole lot difference. The word on the street is if you're better at reading and writing, the ACT, if you're better at math than the SAT, that's kind of the unofficial word on the street. The other thing that surprised me is just before the pandemic, about 2 years before the pandemic, the ACT had eclipsed the SAT. More kids take now the ACT than the SAT, which is kind of interesting. That's not true on Guam. On Guam, the SAT is still king, but the ACT did grow in numbers quite a bit. But no school cares. You can take the SAT or the ACT. In fact, if you take both, then send both scores in, and they have some little concordance table where they'll take a look and say, well, okay, this ACT is better than the SAT. Okay. All right. The other thing to bear in mind is that sometimes the SAT or the ACT score can be used to help determine merit scholarships, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Okay. All right. Financial aid. Okay, there's two types of financial aid, and Jane and I are going to talk a little bit about need-based financial aid, and then we'll get more into the merit scholarships, which is kind of where this whole series of presentations is going. Okay, so financial aid comes in two separate flavors: need-based financial aid and merit-based financial aid. Need-based financial aid is exactly what it sounds like. You don't have $75,000 in your pocket to go to Stanford. So then what's going to happen? So what happens is you file this form called the FAFSA form, not FAFA form, the FAFSA form that opens October 1st. And this is called the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And this is the thing that opens the door to all of the federally subsidized financial aid out in the world. Some schools, usually your higher flying, more selective ones, will also require this form called the CSS profile form. Most schools do not require it, but some do. And make sure that you know if your school does require it. So what is the FAFSA? Well, it's this thing that looks a heck of a lot like a tax form. It looks almost exactly like your IRS forms, where they're going to ask you a lot of questions about how much money you have. And they're going to ask you how much you owe on your house. They're going to ask you, do you have an IRA? Do you have stocks? They're going to ask all of this information to try to get a good financial picture of who you are and how much money you have access to. The CSS profile form is a similar form for the same purpose. And then based on that, they're going to figure out how much money you can spend on your child's college education. So if we say Stanford costs $70,000 a year, you fill out your FAFSA, and your FAFSA says you can pay $30,000 a year, then Stanford and the feds are going to find $40,000 worth of financial aid for you. Now, that financial aid is actually, I got my slides out of order here. That financial aid is going to come in three separate forms. Some of it will be a grant, some of it will be a loan, and some of it will be in this thing called a work-study program. So let's just talk about those things for a minute. The grants are gifts. They're good. They don't need to be repaid. They begin with G because they are great. So we like those grants. It's just money. Here's the money. Come to school. Loans, of course, are less good. They need to be repaid, and there's an interest rate. Now, there are two types of loans you can get. There's a subsidized loan and an unsubsidized loan. Subsidized loans means that while you are in college, the federal government is paying your interest on the loan. Unsubsidized loan is just the opposite. Nobody's paying the interest on your loan. So if you have a $10,000 subsidized loan, when you graduate from college, the balance on that loan will be $10,000. If you have a $10,000 unsubsidized loan, when you graduate from college, the balance on that loan will be $17,432.16. I'm making those numbers up. Don't quote me on that, okay? The other part of this is a work-study grant. And the work study grant is exactly what it sounds like. You get a job on campus and the federal government pays your wage. When you start talking about colleges and you start talking about the cost of attendance, and this is where that $70,000 at Stanford comes from. It's not necessarily all tuition. It's not even all room and board. It involves books. It involves travel. It involves toothpaste money. And so the work study program puts money in your pocket so you don't have to call mom and dad up to get toothpaste or to buy pizza. So that's what the work study program is. And I really encourage kids to utilize it if they get a work study grant, because it does a whole bunch of things. And it kind of gives a little structure to your day in college, which can seem kind of structure free at times. There are two other programs, need-based financial programs that are very good to get involved in. One of them is the Gates Millennium Scholar Program. And the other one is the, I think I left out 1A, Asian American Pacific Islander Scholarship Fund. It's, again, that's another one that's actually started by Robert Underwood and some investors on the West Coast. And that one is nowhere near as rich as the Gates Millennium, but it's, again, $2,000 to $3,000 of money to help in your, and again, those applications are online as well. I do want to take another minute to talk about this thing called the Western Undergraduate Exchange, which is wishy-wooey. And Jane's got some good data on this too. Essentially, there are some Western universities that residents from Guam can attend for 1.5 times the in-state tuition rate. And so those are some schools to get to know. Jane, can you talk about wishy-wooey for a minute?
Sure. I feel this is like the hidden gem. This is a great way for students to get an off-island college experience, but not pay some of the like $70,000 a year crazy costs. A good number of St. John's graduates do attend wishy-wooey schools, including the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So instead of paying the, oh gosh, 30,000 or so out-of-state rate, they're paying roughly 16,000, which is 150% of the in-state rate for the University of Hawaii at Manoa, for example. And there's over 160 schools that are part of Wishy and Wooey. We can certainly send some information to GFA to send to everyone who's participating tonight with more information about the program. But it is a really great opportunity to, again, get that off-island experience, but not have to pay quite as much. And there's several smaller regional schools that take part in Wishy and Wooey. The majority of schools that are in Wishy and Wooey are not the flagship schools for each of these states, with the exception of the University of Hawaii at Manoa, others, the University of Nevada at Las Vegas is one of the schools as well. There aren't some of the bigger schools, for example, like Cal State Berkeley, not part of Wishy Wooey, but several smaller, more regional schools are part of Wishy and Wooey, which to a degree can be really helpful for students from Guam who are coming from a very small island going to a relatively smaller school as opposed to diving to like these really huge schools. So it can be really good for our students as well in terms of that aspect. But it is a really good opportunity for us.
University of Nevada, Reno. That's one to keep in mind. Sorry.
Right, you're able to get these opportunities without having to pay quite as much. As if you're attending one of these schools, maybe playing soccer there, maybe having a partial soccer scholarship, the remaining amount that you have to pay out of pocket will be relatively lower because it is part of the Wishy and Wooey network.
And like everything, there are different rules and stipulations, and read the fine print here and there. You can go to the University of Arizona as long as you study mining. So there's other weird things that are associated with it. But again, it's you can do a Google search for Western Undergraduate Exchange. They have a great website with all kinds of information. And probably, again, for us, the University of Hawaii is the best thing for the Guam folks because it saves you $16,000 a year at UH. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay.
Hey,
All
Bob,
right. Yeah.
can I ask a quick question?
No problem.
So the Wishy, the Wooey, yeah, what a great opportunity. I've met with the vice speaker. She's one of the leaders on this side that we have to pay into to participate in the program. My question is, so it is a scholarship. even though we are a member of the 160 schools, if we decide to go, or if our children decide to go to these schools, you have to apply for it. You have to still get it. You just don't get it from coming from Guam. Is that correct?
There are a couple that you do just get it from. I think UH is one you just get it. But there are.
Sure.
I'm not 100% sure, but there are a couple that are just automatic. But for the most part, again, do your homework and find out in advance.
The majority are automatic, but there are a handful, and these tend to be more selective, in which there is either an additional application or they're taking like the top X percent. So for example, Cal Poly Pomona or Oregon State University, which is a new member, it's like the top 15% of applicants or something like that. But like Bob said, like do your research, look at each school. But again, the majority, it is automatic if you get into the school and have a certain GPA.
Thank you very much.
As a side note, if you know Rodney Jacob, he's really the shaker and mover trying to get this, who got this thing going, and he's actually a member of their board. So if you do see Rodney Jacob and you take advantage of this, just say, hey, good job with that. Little side note there. Okay, so that's basically the financial aid need-based. And now we enter the merit-based scholarship stuff. So merit-based scholarship basically means, hey, you got a skill, you got a talent, we like that, we want you here. It's got nothing to do with your need to pay or not. And so some of these, again, are automatic, but others are not. Famously, both Snoop Dogg and Jay-Z had children who received athletic scholarships, one to UCLA and the other to USC, I think, to play football. And again, I'm certain those two guys can pay out of pocket but so it's got nothing to do with your ability to pay. It's got to do with the fact that you have a skill, and that's kind of neat. Again, part of the message we've been trying to get across from you is academics matter. And probably the largest amount of merit scholarship is given out as academic merit aid. You have good grades, you have good SAT scores, here's some money. So that you don't have to pay $65,000. We're going to give you a $20,000 scholarship. So now it's down to 45. So again, it's still 45 is still a lot, but it's helping out. So that's academic merit. There are artistic scholarships. We've got there are dance scholarships, there's drama scholarships, music, all of those things. But of course, the thing that we're here to talk about today is athletic scholarships. Okay. So that's part of the big process is the athletic scholarship. All right. Go ahead.
One very quick thing with that. So if we can just go back a slide for a second. Schools will cobble together different types of scholarships, right? So you might get a 10,000 athletic scholarship, but you're also perhaps getting a 15,000 academic scholarship because your grades are really high, and maybe also you're getting some work study. So that combination is often what some schools will do to help make it more affordable for some of their student athletes. So this is a huge reminder for why academics are so important, because you can earn scholarship money for it in addition to your athletics.
Yeah, I mean, think about you as the coach. I've got 9.9 full academic scholarships I can give out. But Susan over there she got a nice whopping $35,000 presidential scholarship. So she doesn't need all of my scholarship. She can use some of the merit scholarship. And so I can help somebody else out. So, I mean, that's, again, more of that academic is going to help you a lot. All right. And yeah, cobbling together, that's the big thing too. You're usually not going to find one person with one, well, maybe the Gates Millennium kid, but you're usually not going to find one kid with just one source of financial aid. They're normally going to have quite a few, okay? By the way, Gates Millennium, if you get that, just stay in school all the way to your PhD because they'll pay the whole way. So remember that one too, okay? All right, merit scholarships, okay? So particularly with the athletic stuff, a lot of times they're 1 year renewable scholarships. So it might not be a 4-year scholarship that you get. And again, think about it from the coach's point of view with injuries, with bad grades, with all these other types of things. So that they're not necessarily going to say, hey, 4 years, here you go. And so again, they're mostly 1 year renewable, and that's going to require your participation in academics and athletics. Say the NCAA Division I coach has about 9.9 full scholarships to give away. And again, as we mentioned a couple of times, they're going to divide this usually into partial. They're not going to waste one kid for one full scholarship. They're going to give it. And then as Jane pointed out, this can also be coupled with other financial aid packages. Now, people will say crazy things to you that just flat out are not true. And so there was one guy, I think he was running for office not so long ago, that said he got a full athletic scholarship to the Naval Academy. Well, the Naval Academy is free. So I'm not sure what a full athletic scholarship to the Naval Academy would be, but it's free. The other one that I've heard is I got a full athletic scholarship to put in Ivy League University here. Ivy League universities, again, like Division III, don't give athletic scholarships. Now, I do know that there are some scholarships that it seems only athletes in Ivy League schools get, but it's not necessarily an athletic scholarship. And so, you got to be careful in listening to what the word on the street is, because oftentimes people will mislead you or say things, and again, not necessarily mislead you, but just because of, again, subtle vocabulary things that are important, they get wrong. And so, again, bear that in mind when you hear people talking about this, that, or the other thing, okay? But really, the most important point here is a lot of these are going to be one-year renewable scholarships. Normally, your financial aid package, they are all one-year things that need to be re-upped. You need to file the FAFSA every year that you're in college and grad school. But unless there's a dramatic change in your financial world or your academics, you're going to get about the same all the time. The soccer coaches might suddenly get another hot striker from Ohio, and they may not need you as much as they did before. So that's something that can happen. And again, I don't mean to make it seem like they're being dishonest, and they're not. They're just looking out for their program. So just bear that in mind, okay? Let's see. And then now, this is the big thing. And this is part of what the rest of this series of speakers is going to address as far as what you're going to be doing. And so as a soccer kid, you're at a little bit of a disadvantage over a runner, a swimmer, or even a golfer or a tennis player. Because the runner can say to the coach, I can run the 400 in 52 seconds. And that's a metric that the coach can then say, wow, okay, that's information to help me. The swimmer can do the same thing. The golfer can say, hey, I have a USGA handicap of -2, and that's a metric. And even the tennis player can say, I have a WTA ranking of whatever. But when you go up to a coach and you say, hey, I'm one of the best soccer players in Guam, that's a subjective statement. And so does one of the best soccer players in Guam, is that better than being the 35th best soccer player in Nevada? I don't know. And I don't think the coach knows. So that's one of the things. You see a lot of people filming games, and coaches are going to want to see film. They're going to want to watch how you play. There are for-pay services. So, and one of them is a speaker later on in this series as well, where if you pay them a certain amount of money, then they will help lead you through this process. And I have this little parenthetical statement here: spend money to save money. But I don't know really how much they cost. But if I were just to guess, and I'd say $2,000, if you're to pay them $2,000 and they get you a $5,000 scholarship, well, again, that's still $3,000 you've saved, but it's an interesting thing. The other thing I want to alert to you, and I mentioned this earlier before, if anybody starts saying guarantee, I guarantee that you can, you want to really, really, really be careful with that person. Okay. If possible, and Jane mentioned this earlier, if possible, go to an off-island tournament. These summer off-island tournaments, there's coaches there watching. They know. GFA has connections with some of, in fact, one of my students played at Bowling Green through a GFA connection. I forget at that time. This is going back. This is back when I was still coaching. So I don't know how long ago that was. So, you know, that was a connection that GFA had. And that's one of the things that Guam football has been doing a very good job at over the past 10, 15 years, is really working out to get more connections. And then the last point here, and this has really been taking place, you know, more Guam kids are playing college soccer in the United States. And that's going to make it easier for everybody in the future. Because if that coach in Bowling Green University has no idea how Bob Kelley is at soccer, well, the answer is not very good. But you know, then he can turn to his Guam kid and say, "Hey, tell me about Kelley. Is he any good?" And so that will make it easier in the future for all the kids coming, because again, the more that we get out there, and if you get the opportunity to go play in the U.S. mainland, do the best job you possibly can, because that's going to be the thing that's going to help everybody else. Okay. Some resources here, and as Jane mentioned, GFA has these slides, and you'll be able to get some of these things. Just some places that you can go. Collegeboard.org. This is where you're going to register for your SAT. They have a great service on there called The Big Future, and The Big Future is something that can help search for colleges that have the things that you want. And the other financial aid form, the CSS profile form, is also on the College Board website. ACTstudent.org, that's where you're going to go for your ACT registration. Studentaid.gov, that's where your FAFSA is going to be. Collegescorecard.ed.gov is a really fascinating website for people like Jane and I. Other folks, maybe not so much, but it's got a lot of information on students who return for their sophomore year, what percentage of students do, what the average financial aid package is for kids, average, and it's got a lot of great information on schools and how well they serve students. And again, you'd have to be kind of an admissions kind of crazed person to really kind of get in there. But I encourage you to take a look at it. If you have a school in mind, that's a good thing to look at. NCAA.org, I mentioned earlier, they're going to give you some good information. That's also how you're going to be able to link to the Eligibility Center. And then College Admissions Decoded podcast from NACAC, which is the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, how college admissions are different for student athletes. One little point about NACAC and the presentation you've just experienced. So NACAC is a professional organization for people who are involved in college admissions, both from high schools and from universities. And Jane and I are two of the members here on Guam, two of the few members of NACAC on Guam, and both Jane and I have given presentation at NACAC's national conference. So, you know, so that's some of that information. And that, I think, leads us to the end, just the bibliography.
One quick thing, I've also posted 3 links in the chat. The first 2 are really helpful PDFs that have quite a bit of information. First is from NACAC, which is a shorter PDF, and then the other one is from the NCAA. And these are resources that anyone who's looking at playing at the collegiate level should definitely take a look at. There's a lot more detail than what we just went through in this, very short hour-long presentation. A lot more detail there, so I highly encourage you to take a look. Just download the PDFs, read through them at some point. There's advice not only for seniors but also 9th through 12th grade. A lot of what we talked about is included in those PDFs, including the, for example, GPA, SAT, ACT. Chart that we mentioned earlier, and just lots more advice in terms of what you should do at each grade level. And that last one is for a podcast that I found to be very helpful. So also another place you can look at it as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing also I think we want you to all take away from this, and I don't want to speak for Jane on this, but I'm not a hard guy to find. you can find me fairly easily. I go to the mall just like everybody else. I read in church. You can find me, and I've never yet yelled at a kid for pestering me with questions about college admissions. So again, don't feel bad about coming up and asking me, because as you've just learned right now, I do like to talk. You can also hear me at certain times at the Guam Football Association National Training Facility. So I'm around there every now and again. If you do have questions, so we were booked until 7:30. So technically we still have 15 more minutes, 16 more minutes to hang around to answer whatever questions you'd like. And again, as I say, don't be bashful if you see me in the mall and you have a question. Be happy to answer as best I can. Okay. Thanks very much for your attention. If you have more questions, we'll hang out here for a little bit longer. Otherwise, have a lovely evening. And this has been recorded, and I'm sure they'll put it up on their website, and the transcript will also be in there with those PDFs that Jane was mentioning. Thanks so much. Any questions?
Well, no questions as of right now, but we do have a comment from Coach Dom. And this is to all the players who are watching right now. And it's to speak to your respective coaches about your highlights. There are specific things coaches want to see. We can help you put your videos together. So what Coach Dom is talking about is when we do have your player resumes or your player CVs, most times they require like a highlight video of all the games or specific games and highlights of your playing career as of right now. So like what Coach Dom is saying to your national team coaches, your high school coaches, if you can get footage and record, any coach would be more than willing to help you get there. And
yeah, I think that's kind of the same message that I think we'd all give you. Your coaches are there to help you. Your teachers are there to help you. We're all here to try to, every one of you getting into play college soccer is going to make us all look better. And so that's great. You get a chance to ask a question. Don't not ask that question, because that could be something that could change the way you look at things. All right.
Bob and Jane, this is Dwayne Paul talking. I really want to thank you. I mean, this so informative. In my case, personally, not only just being such and coaching and doing what I do to help our kids and to further soccer and everything that we do, is my son. It's a personal thing for me. So he's a junior, and we're traveling this summer, and we're doing ID camps, and we are going to visit coaches. We're going to visit schools, and they have no idea what Guam's about. So with him this coming summer, I'm really hoping to be able to provide a little bit more knowledge to other student athletes on Guam to further their careers, because it really, it's like music, it's like sport. Everything allows you can go somewhere new in the whole wide world and be an athlete or a musician, and you can make friends, you can make family, and it just grows the world. Like sport is just a great way to do this. So Bob and Jane, I really like to thank you for this, and I'm really going to probably call you in the next couple of days, and maybe we can have tea or lunch and talk more about this. But really, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dwayne. Yeah, our pleasure. My son's a junior volleyball player, so I'm kind of going through the same thing with a different world.
Hi, this is PK.
Yes,
I
Mr.
just have a comment. Hi, Bob. I just have a comment about something that you said earlier. It was an excellent point, and I just want to emphasize it a little bit. There are currently 3 players at a D3 school in Ohio called Muskingum University. At one point they had 4. And anyway, I can testify that those young men got there because their families were talking to each other, and they were talking to that coach, and they were talking to the admissions office there. So I just wanted to throw that out there to emphasize that it's super useful for parents to have these conversations with each other. And I'm selfishly putting that out there because, I want to be talking to you all about, what your plans are for your boy and girl. So like, for example, to Dwayne's point a moment ago, it's good when I don't see Dwayne very often, but when I do, it's good because we always sort of catch up on stuff like this. Thank you, everybody, the organizers and everything. Our family enjoyed listening in. Thank you.
Thanks, PK. Ms. Guzman has a raised hand. Yes, Ms. Guzman?
just wanted to let also the families know that my daughter also got an athletics scholarship to play college soccer also at Iowa, and we did pay for services. So we went through the NCSA, and that's how she also got scouted, and she was one of the first students at Teason High School to get an athletic scholarship through that way. And most of her footage also came from GFA with the national team. I just have a concern, with this pandemic, like my daughter's an incoming freshman now, and they didn't get to get in a lot of tournaments. So hopefully they get to do more as everything is lifted up. Other than that, I just want to let everyone know that we did pay for NCSA. We paid about $2,000 at the minimum. So if you're willing to pay to get more colleges to scout your child, then that's what we did.
Yeah, and great success story. And that's, again, there are the success stories out there, and I'm not familiar with that whole process. So thank you, Ms. Guzman. That's great information.
And can I ask, what school is your daughter going to? I grew up in Iowa.
Yeah, she's going to William Penn University. It's a smaller college, but we wanted to have more playing time.
Yeah.
And I think it's, so it's not double, it's not, I already forgot all the acronyms. So
Yes.
I forgot what it is. It's not Division I, it's a different, I guess it's because, it's not under the NIA Division II.
That's yeah. Jane was just missing home when you started talking Iowa.
Yeah, she's all the way in Oskaloosa, near the corn.
Anything else any other questions, anybody?
All right, I think that may conclude everyone's questions. So again, thank you, Bob and Jane, for this very informative presentation. So for all the questions that were asked, we will be jotting it down and sending everything out via email, which we will include our website link, which will have this presentation as well as all the Q&A that was asked throughout this seminar. We asked you to give us about 5 business days for it to reflect onto the website. But as of right now on the website, you will be able to find more information about our AHEAD program, which talks about our college pathway and what the GFA would like to do to help players get into that next level for education as well as their athletics. And it's fine that everyone is mentioning NCSA. We will be doing another presentation on NCSA for all the players and parents later on. So thank you everyone for taking the time for coming tonight, and we hope you guys all have a great night. See you guys later.
All right, bye-bye now.